Valo, thank you very much for the warm welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome all to Dublin on this beautiful sunny day. The seagulls are very excited, as you can hear. I'm delighted to introduce this final concluding panel. We have an excellent lineup, and the topic is the role of social partners in reclaiming the European social model. So a pretty tall order, and I think we have about 40 minutes to do it. So I'm going to invite on stage to reclaim the European social model Salvatore Marra, who is Head of European and International Policies at CGIL and Executive Committee Member of ETUC. Maxime Cerutti, Director of Social Affairs at BusinessEurope. Maria Jepsen, Deputy Director at Eurofound, and Arlene McCarthy, who is former MEP, Executive Director, AMC Strategy, and Special Advisor at Bloomberg. So a fantastic lineup, and I'm looking forward to a great discussion. So I think given that this panel is charged with focusing on the role of the social partners, it would be good to kick off with the social partners. So maybe Salvatore, as you're next to me, it's a big topic. So how do you, from your perspective, see the role of the social partners in strengthening, deepening the European social model at a time when, perhaps focus and priorities risk being elsewhere? So how do we marry the various goals that face the European Union in terms of competitiveness, international geopolitics, and so on? What is the role of the social partners?
Thank you for this possibility to address you today. First of all, I'd like to say to, of course, Ivailo and all the Eurofound people that workers are proud of Eurofound. We are part of, we feel really part of the family, and we really feel the responsibility and proud of being part of tripartism. There has never been a time where tripartism, to already answer your question, has been so important. It's a moment where multilateralism is strongly under attack, and there's never been a time where we as workers feel the need to defend multilateral institutions, and tripartite institutions like Eurofound play a key role. So thank you, Eurofound, and 50 more years of success. It's absolutely important for working people in Europe. I'll go straight to the point. Well, they are telling us in this geopolitical turmoil that we need to be more competitive. Who will say no? Trade unions will never say no. We absolutely need to be more competitive and more productive when it comes to workplaces. But I'll be provocative here. Have we not learned the lesson of austerity already? There's been austerity in this continent. And countries like Greece, Portugal, this country already paid a huge price when they told us, well, you cannot afford anymore your social model. You have to cut on collective bargaining. You have to cut on wages. You have to cut on social rights, because this will make your countries more competitive. Well, this was a wrong recipe. And it's Eurofound data and other institutions that told us so. Because it was proved that when they decided with the memoranda in Greece of the Troika to disrupt, for instance, collective bargaining, the country did not become more competitive. It was only people who paid the price. It was only workers who paid the price. So I think that's a very important lesson. This is why we as trade unions keep saying that the social model, that the tripartism, that the reforms that are made together by the social partners with the institutions are the reforms that will work better, and they will work both for the companies and for the unions. And I will conclude with one very concrete example. And it's this one. Look at Eurofound's data and look at the global rights index of the International Trade Union Confederation. Look at the top ranking countries in terms of respect of social rights, of collective bargaining, of trade unions. Those countries are the most competitive. It's not the ones where the trade unionists are in jail or there are strikes that are banned, etc. So it's a clear and simple message. The social model is absolutely the key to have a competitive Europe and not the contrary. So we will do our best, and we are, again, as I said, very proud of being part of Eurofound as a tripartite institutions, because this is where we can really shape reforms that are useful for us working people and for the companies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Strong, provocative, and we'll come back to the sort of reforms that you have alluded to in a moment. But I think it would be good to hear from your perspective, Maxime, on the side of Business Europe, the employers, the industries and business that I suppose are, in a sense, expected to do a lot of the heavy lifting on competitiveness. Where do you see the role of the social partners, and is that role of workers as important as Salvatore has outlined?
Thanks a lot, Lucinda, and good morning to all of you. It's also a pleasure for me to be in this Eurofound forum. I used to be involved already in the years 2007 and following for a number of years quite directly in Eurofound activities, more closely than I am now, but I am very much remembering these times with a lot of good memories, and it's been a pleasure to meet again some people here that I know from this period, and to see that Eurofound today is really playing its role, and having an event like that is of course contributing to highlight the visibility and the role that Eurofound can play. So I support fully what Salvatore just said on the importance of tripartism, and I think it was very clear through the evening yesterday as well that we are all in the same boat in Eurofound, and that through the dialogue, through the cooperation, and the understanding of the different needs, but also the role of Eurofound being to provide facts, so that then the government and social partners can use them in a good way, is really something that we value. On today's panel, I'd like to first reflect a little bit on what we heard from Daniel Susskind. Then I would like also to share a little bit my impressions about what we received from Eurofound as a basis for today's gathering in the note that we received before. And then I will be commenting a bit on what I think is important for the way forward. So on the first part, it was of course very thought-provoking and well-built argument and presented by Daniel Susskind yesterday evening and this morning, but I want to also highlight some differences in what I heard with what I think Eurofound should be focusing on. I think one of the key messages that was coming out of Daniel Susskind's presentation was around the role of work, and highlighting that we need to be prepared in a society in future where work would play less of a role than it has been over the very long term and up until today. And of course, he was raising this from the perspective of distributing growth and how it's going to be organized in the future when work is less prominent in organizing this. And I think Eurofound has a very important role to highlight the importance of work. And I think we as social partners, we are convinced about that. And I think the governments also need to support this, because work needs to be in the future. And I think what is really the core of what we are discussing here is how are we going to use technology as humans in work situations in a good way, so that it's going to serve at the same time increase productivity of labor, and at the same time, of course, create the possibilities for having social dialogue, collective bargaining, play its role to improve the working conditions. So I think this is what we really need to focus on, how to achieve this good synergy in technology and human beings, And I think it should not be about saying humans were good for emotional work because we are made of bodies and soul, and that the machines can replace everything else. I think we need to be really focusing on each aspect of what is in the skills of people. And it is about the manual work, it is about the cognitive work, it is about the emotional dimension. And for all of this, we need to understand what is best done by humans and what is best done by the AI technology, for example. And so there is a future for us because it is about this tripartism and what we do bipartite, how to organize this in a good way. Then the point on the Eurofound's report, or the note that we received, I mean, there is this perspective which is central, and this is a key message that we have heard in different ways yesterday evening and today, which is the social model is basically an enhancing factor for competitiveness. And on this, I want to nuance it. I mean, yes, we are all attached and we all understand the benefits of having social policies in place because people need it and because it is important to also support the labor markets and make sure that we do the best with the people we have. So employers included, we are part of that. Now, we also need to be more precise. I mean, in the around 30% of GDP that is being invested and spent on the social policies in Europe, I think we need to be better and more open in discussing what works and what works less. And there is also a big role for the facts to tell us where are we effective in using the resources to best effect in reaching the objectives that we share, economically and socially objectives that are going to make us stronger. And on this, I think Eurofound has an important role to bring the facts. We should not start from a premise that is really a principle based that has no exception. I think we need to be a bit more granular in understanding what is today the welfare state, how does it work in different member states, what is the effectiveness of the use of resources to achieve our goals, and there is room to improve. So there is room to say, less effective on such measures, more effective. It's also about what is most needed and less needed when we have an aging population, when we have, of course, needs which are evolving realities. But it's also about focusing our resource where it is going to make most of the difference. And that leads me a bit to a comment on what Salvatore said. I mean, austerity is not the practice of today. I mean, we see that the governments, they are doing their best in using their resource. There has been a lot of additional spending in the response to COVID. We have seen debts increasing to a large extent. And of course, it is important to have strong public finances. But now it is not about cutting for cutting. It is about making sure that we have the public resource where it can be and where it is going to strengthen, but at the same time be realistic on what is possible. So I think there is room, but this room for Eurofound, in future, it's really about being a bit more specific about what within the social policy segment is improving our competitiveness and productivity. And on this, I think there is also the connection with others. For example, CDFOP is with us today. There are tools which may be worked in common because the skills is, of course, part of the response. I think the ERM, the restructuring monitor, the jobs monitor, which have been there for many years, provide good information. But now that the Commission is announcing that they are going to work on skills intelligence, we need to make sure that all this data is really going to improve, the basis on which governments and social partners can then provide the measures through the policies and the collective bargaining. And my last word is perhaps to say collective bargaining has a key role to play. We all know that there is a diversity of practice in the member states, but I think as such, the value of the collective bargaining is to be nearer to the economic reality and to be nearer to the workers. And we need to have social and labor laws in the member states in a way that is encouraging more space for collective bargaining solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. a lot to consider there. We will come back to some of it. Maria, I'd like to bring you in. I think there's been a lot of praise, rightly, for Eurofound and the excellent research and data that it provides to inform policy making and to, I suppose, to strengthen European policymakers' work around the European social model. And I think both MEP Anderson and now Maxime have talked about effective use of resources and targeting of resources and ensuring the policies, are fit for purpose. Do you see an enhanced role for Eurofound in that provision of that evidence-based research, that data to inform, future decision-making in Europe around the European social model?
I can only answer yes to that, can't I? Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think this is what we're trying to do on a continuous basis, is trying to understand, like, where is it that we can provide evidence for policymakers to move forward. And listening in on the discussions that we've had today and right now, I'm going to cite some data, but it's not going to be Eurofound data. I'm going to go to Eurobarometer data as well, because yesterday we talked about, we know what some of the solutions are, but finally what we're going to do also depends on what citizens want, right? So Eurobarometer is a place where you can go and see what do citizens want. And what really astounded me is that this dichotomy, which is not really a dichotomy between competitiveness and the European social model or the well-being of the citizens, is not a dichotomy. It can be put forward as a dichotomy. Here we're discussing it as something that goes together. And when we ask the European citizens about it, for them, both of them say that EU policy action should be with regard to action to support fairness across social groups and gender, and help to industry to become more competitive and decarbonize. Now, when you ask European citizens about these two items, they have the same kind of percentage. So 35% of the citizens think that the actions to support fairness across social groups, and 36% of the population thinks that help should be given to industries to become more competitive. So basically what I'm trying to say is, like, both of these items are equally important for EU citizens, right? So there's not one or the other. And I think that comes back to what citizens want. And when we look at, then they ask you, okay, so what are the values that are embodied by the EU? They talk about fundamental rights as the most important. They talk about the freedom of speech and the social quality and the well-being of the population. So these are fundamental values that EU citizens expect to be delivered on. So I can't see how the European Union or the member states cannot deliver on all these items, on the competitiveness, but also on the well-being of the citizens. So if we look at a little bit of the conversation we had here, we basically have a trilemma, right? So we've got competitiveness, we've got the well-being, and we got the environment. Now, the environment was not mentioned a lot today, but it was mentioned a lot yesterday. So I put it, we have a trilemma. So what are the to kind of solve this trilemma, what do we do? Technology was one of the issues, one of the items that were put on the table. And the other item that's being put on the table today here is the European social model as a way of resolving or absorbing this trilemma that we're facing, responding to the expectations and the requests of the European population. Now, and that's where we come in to say, like, okay, but what exactly, if technology is going to solve some of the issues, what is then the role of the European social model? And I think when we look at this European social model, it is not a static entity. It has always evolved. If we go back to the Rome Treaty and we see how the understanding of what a European social model is, it has evolved immensely. The instruments that we've used to promote the European social model has evolved immensely. I also think a new element that has become a demonstration of this is lately the importance of housing in this discussion around what a social model should actually deliver on, whereas a couple of years ago, this was something, it was in the European Pillar of Social Rights, but it was not really on the agenda. Today, it's very much on the agenda, and it's linked to the cost of living crisis and so forth. So I think that this entity of the European social model, it evolves as new challenges arise. And what you were saying, Maxime, is that we need to focus on where is it we need to action today. And I think that's the challenge, is because the challenges are so multidimensional and they're very holistic, is to kind of concentrate and say, okay, this is where we need to hone in and do much better. And I think on the labor market, as was said earlier on today, the labor market is really strong. But this strength in the labor market has not been fully translated back into poverty, into in-work poverty, where we're kind of stagnating. So while we've been able to do good things in the labor market, on the other side, on the poverty, we've done much less. We haven't been able to kind of resolve the issues on the poverty side, as one would expect with such a labor market as we have today. So there are things going on with regard to policy that we still need to look into. And for this to happen, and here it's a plea, and what we all often jump into at Eurofound is that when we try to figure out what policies work and they don't work, there are very few public policies that are actually evaluated. And the evaluations are not always of a high quality. So if you want to know exactly what to do and where you can do an effective intervention, there has to be a little bit more policy evaluation that takes place. And that's maybe a very nerdy kind of request, but it is one that can actually help us to move forward and provide even more and better evidence in terms of what works and what does not work.
I think that's a really important point, policy evaluation and also impact assessments. And I think impact assessments are less focused and rigorous than they used to be in terms of the impact of all forms of regulatory frameworks and legislative initiatives at European level as well. So there's work to be done there, I think, to reprioritize the evaluation of the effectiveness of both policies and regulation. Arlene, you are a geopolitical expert, so I know that you're going to bring all this. Bring all this together for us. But a question: we have I think, a social model in Europe that we are proud of. That's not to say it's perfect, and that it doesn't require attention, particularly in the context of geopolitical changes and shifts. We see an increasingly polarized world. And we also see and hear increasingly criticism of the European social model from some of our global partners, like the United States, for example, where there is a sentiment, rightly or wrongly, that American taxpayers fund Europe's security and defense, allowing Europe to spend on other priorities like the European social model. So there is a tension there that is growing and poses potentially a risk. Is that something that you see, that you feel, and how should Europe address that, do you think?
Well, can I just reinforce the point about data and evidence-based policy making? And I say that as someone who works for Michael Bloomberg, who's a global philanthropist, and everything and every project and program that's done through the Bloomberg Foundation is evidence-based and data-driven. And the reason that's important in the social policy field is because with the rise of populism, that's an evidence-free zone. And in fact, you can demonstrate very clearly, I think last week with the announcement around the Europe's Globalization Fund, that 81% of workers have now found jobs again through that. So that's an action-based program that's delivering in the social policy field. So I just wanted to make that point because I think it's important as we have attacks on the social model. And I think it's also important to underline, Lucinda, that neither the letter or the Draghi report single out the social model as an issue. Not at all, in fact. In fact, they say it's critical and fundamental to delivering competitiveness. From my perspective, just briefly before I touch on the geopolitics, I think the major problem that Europe has, and where business is actually unhappy, and I know that because I speak to global business, is being tackled in terms of overregulation. It's the overregulation, the burden of regulation, that is making us anti-competitive vis-a-vis other, the US and China. But that's not in the social policy field. That's in issues like AI, which is critical, and we now see the Commission this week rolling back on some of those AI policies because they realize it's not going to deliver a European Silicon Valley. So I think that the other area that I've worked in for many years is finance. And again, we see that, and I am going to be critical of the European Commission on this front, is that we've been talking for 10 years about a capital markets union, and now we've rebranded it. It's being called the Savings and Investment Union. But the bottom line is we don't have, unlike the US, we don't have venture capital. We are totally reliant on banks to lend money to innovative companies or startups, and banks are not lending or taking that kind of risk. And so I think really we need to have a better combination between private and public capital to do that. I think the onus is on governments really to support that. But if we look at the geopolitical field, I mean, I don't want to send everybody home with a sense of doom, because in a sense, we now are very complacent about talking about the Ukraine crisis, trade tariffs. One of my colleagues, a Bloomberg chief economist, has just given us an intervention to global CEOs in Singapore. And his speech was, we're facing a new world disorder. But it's not just Ukraine. Putin's now looking at an eastern front. We've got India and Pakistan skirmishes. We've got Cambodia and Thailand, now tension. We've got China and Taiwan. I mean, some people will say that China will probably invade Taiwan within the next 2 years. What does that mean for the semiconductor industry? What does that mean for the supply chain, for critical minerals? Again, we see the Commission acting now, saying they're going to collectively pull together in terms of supply of critical minerals, but too late. It's always too late and too little. And I have to be critical about that because we've seen the writing on the wall for quite a long time. And that's why the US looks at us particularly. They'll look at European business particularly, will look at, do I want to invest? Do I want to invest in the EU? They'll see it as high indebtedness, high taxes. Actually, not the social policy, the social model is not their problem. But they see overspending. Now they see the fact that, as you said, Lucinda, that Trump is now adding tariffs, which are coming very close to what happened in the Second World War, when we had complete, a lack of any global trade system at all. So we're heading towards a precipice in some of those areas. And I think they also see that we now have to pay for our own security. Where are we going to find $2 trillion for defense? Because that's what we have to spend. We need $2 trillion to do that. And again, that comes back to why do all our pensions and savings, which of course is the objective of the Savings and Investment Union in Europe, why is that all still going abroad? None of it is invested back in Europe. So we have a lot of work to do, but I would argue, personally, that, that skilled workers, a skilled workforce, that a good social model, a strong social model, enabling our workforce to actually embrace AI and be a part of that is fundamental to tackling some of those problems and to attracting investment from elsewhere. Otherwise, we're faced in the longer term now, with an Asian system that is fundamentally superior to ours, China that we can never catch up with, and the US retreating, not spending money on security, and focusing on its own workforce and its own industry.
We could very quickly become very, very gloomy, and yeah. I'm conscious that this is the concluding panel, so we're going to try and maybe focus on some of the answers or some of the solutions. So one positive that I'm taking away from everybody's contribution is that the European social model is not the problem. It may not be perfect, but it is something that I think we as Europeans value, and it is not a hindrance to our competitiveness. So I suppose we've got about 10 minutes left, and I know people have to catch flights and so on. So very quickly, to sort of bring some of this together, I'd like to ask the panel, and feel free to contribute from your perspective and your, taking into account your experience. So what are the reforms, and Salvatore, you alluded in your introductory remarks to the sort of the opportunity and the need for reform when it comes to the social partners and the trilateral approach. So what are the sort of reforms that can make social partnership and collaboration between the social partners more effective, more nimble? And I'll bring into that question digitization, AI, because I get very frustrated when it's framed as a threat, when in fact AI is an enabler. And actually, if Europe can accelerate and be ahead of the rest, maybe not ahead, but at least compete and keep up with the rest, it is a huge opportunity for the workforce. It's a huge opportunity to deliver efficiencies in our social model. So what are the sort of the changes that you would like to see to make that happen, to secure the European social model in this very challenging geopolitical environment? So please jump in.
Thank you. Thank you. No? Sorry. Okay, this is working again. Who am I to contradict Professor Susskind? He concluded yesterday on an optimistic note. He concluded today on an optimistic note. And I would not be a unionist if I would not deliver a sense of optimism. This would contradict the mission of unionism today in the world in such grim times, because we can of course not neglect that we are through very turbulent times. Before reforms, we need something else, if I may. We need investments. It's absolutely crucial that the European Union talks about investments. This is, I believe Maxime will be with me on this, crucial for companies to thrive. We need public and private investments, and we need the appropriate reforms to accompany the growth with all the limitations we heard from the understanding of growth these days from Professor Susskind. But, and here I have a question, innovation depends on us as well, on companies, and I will talk about Italy here. In my country, in the last 6 years, companies have been redistributing 80% of the profits to their shareholders and have not invested in innovation and technology. What did Professor Susskind tell us before? He told us, forget it. The problem is not the social model. USA thrived because they have invested in technology and innovation. And this is why they have been very successful. Have we done the same? Have we done the same in Europe? No. Can we be very honest about it? We haven't done enough in terms of investing in innovation. And again, when I said, Maxime, it was not to contradict you before, but when I said, have we not learned the message of austerity, it was not about coming back to austerity or not. I don't think it's the topic of today. It's rather about, and I think we agree on that because you said it as well, we need ownership of reforms of the social partners, bipartite, in the bipartite setting, but also in the tripartite setting. We need to reform things together. And there is a proof there, again, and I will make another concrete example. How many lives have we saved during COVID with our bipartite agreement at the workplaces, not to have the virus spread and kill people? That was an example, in my opinion, that we have to keep in our heads. And the lesson we learned after COVID, not only in terms of managing the crisis, but also of having these unique instrument, which is Next Generation EU. Now the question to me is rather, what do we do after Next Generation EU? Your companies need Next Generation EU or an instrument like that. And we need Next Generation EU, and we need the data Maria was just referring to shape the kind of investments and the kind of reforms. So, and I return to my first point, tripartism, multilateralism, more needed than ever. Before asking what, I think we have to ask ourselves how. And the tripartite way of addressing reforms and making innovation also in the AI and in the technology revolution happen is absolutely cooperation amongst social partners and the institutions.
So on my side, a few concluding words as well. I mean, I'll be concrete and I'll try to give ideas of concrete things that could be done. The first thing is, I think Eurofound is best placed to look into occupational mobility. And we have a lot of developments pointing to more restructurings, more companies may be in the situation of laying off people. And these people will need to be supported in finding jobs in other sectors, maybe adapt their skill sets. So our effectiveness in dealing with this is important now. I have also in mind that, of course, in the partnerships with others, ELA is best placed to look into geographical mobility. But the two are linked, occupational, geographical mobility. And so this is an area where we need to make some progress in having the facts in a good way and supporting effective policy intervention at EU and national level. Another example that is, I think, important is, of course, relating to skills. And on this, I just want to flag that on the employer side, we play a key role in that. 90% of the training is paid for by employers. We do so because we believe in the needs and the added value there is for employers, as well as in the social partnership being important for the workers. There is this 60% target in the Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan. We are today at around 40%. If we want to increase 20 percentage points, we need to do better. And on this, we are calling on the Commission to invest 15% of the European Social Fund in the next programming period for incentives to employers to better invest in the training of their workforce. And the last thing I want to highlight is, you mentioned, I think, Arlene, the importance of regulations. I mean, of course, it is not directly for Eurofound, but I think it is a key point for the Commission to also have a vehicle for regulatory burdens reduction when it comes to social directives. And so far we have not seen a lot on that, and in the next year it will be an important priority for us. And the last thing is, of course, Salvatore, I agree with you that it is about investments and reforms. And indeed, we need to see more about what the Commission will do next, because it's not fully clear yet. But we have already indications with the multi-annual financial framework of mid-July. It needs to be made clearer. We have a role as social partners in this process. So we are looking forward to cooperation. Recently, there was a macroeconomic dialogue. And in that context, the Danish presidency was highlighting that between 3% and 4% additional GDP is possible if we do the right reforms on labor markets. Thank you.
Just a point, I mean, on the investment in skills, the assumption, I mean, the 15% target for the European Social Fund, I mean, that's one thing, but it's really a drop in the ocean. I mean, it sort of goes back to Arlene's point, does it not, about the need for a proper capital markets union and investment in European companies to be able to enable them to invest properly in skills as well. So I sometimes think in Europe we always default to governments, the European Commission, you know, the sort of state sector can always provide the solution, when in fact we really need to mobilize the private sector to be able to do that too.
We do, but I think the other point, Lucinda, is that figure I saw last week, which I was quite shocked by, is that not completing the internal market is the equivalent of a 45% tariff barrier.
Yes.
It's enormous.
Yes.
And so, you know, in a sense, my call to action would be to member states now. You know, they need to step up. They need to coordinate better. They need to create the kind of atmosphere for these strategic alliances to cooperate and to actually deliver better on AI skills, because we'll never catch up with the US unless we really make it a priority. And that does mean you have to involve the social partners, business and social partners together, because at the end of the day, we're training people for these new jobs, and we're training them with the skills they need. And I think if you train people and you give them the education, my experience is they're motivated, and particularly young people. They want to be a part of Europe's success. They're not a part of it if they're ignored and are on the fringes and not able to participate in this new model.
Yeah. A question to all, perhaps Maria. The question of lifelong learning is really key here as well, because it's not just young people, and you know the disruption that is coming with AI, which has so many benefits. It will disproportionately affect middle-aged and older workers, and so there's a real necessity if we want to continue to have social cohesion and avoid the sort of polarization that we see in a micro sense in certain European member states at the moment. We also see amplified in other parts of the world. how do we keep those people involved, motivated, part of the workforce, and really feeling they're part of this European social model?
I'm really glad for that question, because I was kind of figuring out how I was going to sneak in my last point where we were, but this is really spot on. So going from the lifelong learning, so what we know is that lifelong learning is basically taken up by those who already have the skills, right? So the lower skilled and the older workers engage much less in lifelong learning. And we've known that for years. And the question is, how can you convince people that have a very strained relationship with training and education, convince them that this is a good thing for them? Like, I don't think we found the silver bullet yet, but there are ways of doing it. But it's a little bit more tailor-made. But so I think that the lifelong learning, we've been talking about it for years and years and years and years, and we're still not there. And we know exactly what the problems are. Like, we know that the people that really need lifelong learning are not taking it up, and we need to get them into it. But so once people have the skills and they've got the training and they've got their lifelong learning, they get to the workplace, right? And this is where I wanted to go. Of course, Eurofound, our surveys on the European Company Survey and the European Working Conditions Survey. What we need to do as well in these transitions, these fundamental transitions, is to ensure that we have a workforce that is engaged and that can actually engage at the workplace. And I think that a lot of the research that we've been doing at Eurofound really points to the fact that we know what the kind of mechanisms that you have to put into a workplace to get this engaged, motivated, and indirectly then productive workers in the workplace. And from the European Working Conditions Survey, we clearly identified that we need the people-centered workplace, which provides autonomy, working time flexibility, skills utilization and development, ways of expressing their voice via trade unions or more indirectly. That provides the motivation, the engagement, and it also has a positive effect on the company performance on various indicators. And when we look into the European working conditions, what we see is also what we do identify is that the higher job quality, the more motivated and engaged workforce you have, and the more easy, I would say, it is for the company then to make these transitions, to introduce disruptive technologies, because if they have a workforce that is engaged and can engage with it and feel that they are being heard, then transitions could go smoother, I would say, in that sense. So your question on lifelong learning and getting the right skill sets really is also how that can be used at the workplace afterwards. And there I think that we've got a lot of evidence now in terms of what are kind of the framework conditions for a workforce to be able to engage more smoothly into these transitions that we're going through. And I think that's maybe not that's a point where we think that we need to reconsider in the light of the digitalization of the workplace. What does that actually mean? How does this actually play out? And that's what we're looking into at the moment, is exactly how this plays out in a positive. And as you said, Maxime, how can this be? Where are the positive experiences? And I think right now, what we see of the European Working Conditions Survey is that it's not a negative experience. Like, they get more tasks and they engage it, but it's not being perceived as something negative.
It's all about adaptability and nimbleness. We have run over time, so this felt very, very fast. I could stay here and discuss this all day. So thank you so much to the panelists. You've really, I think, stimulated a lot of thought, conversation, and hopefully it'll continue as people continue on for the rest of the day. So thank you very, very much, and I really enjoyed that discussion and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucinda, and all the panelists for this last panel. We came to the conclusion of our forum now, and I hope that we succeeded to make what we tried at Eurofound when thinking about it to organize. This was to create a platform to bring together very bright minds and to provide the environment for an exchange of thoughts and ideas. And I think that worked, at least to me. Very interesting interventions, very interesting people, very high level also decision makers speeches that show the direction of what we should and we could expect. For us, that was the purpose of the forum, and I want to thank all of you for being part of it. And we do it every 4 years. Probably in the next 4 years, we are going to reflect about the lessons from this one and think about the next one. But I think we have plenty of food for thought after this forum. We talked very much about Europe, and of course, that's what is very much a preoccupation that all of us we have. I'll bring to your mind something which is probably a bit banalized, a Chinese proverb saying never miss a good crisis. I think to me one of the images which is going to remain after this forum is going to be these two images that Daniel Susskind showed. Whether we are moving on a rail track or we're in the open sea. In his case, the sea was quite calm. I'm afraid ours is not that calm. It's quite rough and choppy. But this is up to us, that we are thinking, analyzing, to the decision makers at European, at national level, to decide what are the best really solutions for the very visible challenges that we see, and the very intense appearance of new challenges and the changes of the environment of the European Union. Of course, we cannot speak about long-term stability of policies in such an environment, but it's very important to have the flexibility and to have some northern star or some guiding light, what is the general direction we want to go to. And again, for us, we have lots of arguments that together with, and I think the Executive Vice President said it best, I mean the competitiveness and the social model are practically the two sides of the same coin. So we have to see how we can better promote these two in order to get further. Thank you very much to all of you who are here today. Also, I would like to thank very much to all of those who joined online, because the plenary sessions were also broadcasted online. I hope you are going to go back home with some thoughts and ideas from this forum. That's going to be the most beneficial effect of it. And I'm looking forward to seeing, not in a long time ahead, the management board members of Eurofound sitting in Loughlinstown and starting our work on the management board. Before that, please have some coffee, some quick lunch, and the buses for Eurofound are going to leave in about 2:15. The idea is to start there at 3 or 3:15, the work of the Executive Board. Again, thank you very much for being here with us today. Thank you very much.